got to make sure your camera's actually on before you start your live stream. It's always a good thing. I was just about to click go live and realized that I hadn't started my camera or started my microphone, and that wouldn't have been a very good show if you can't see me and you can't hear me. I mean, maybe that would work out for the better for some people, but I can't imagine you would sit around for an hour and just have nothing. No video, no audio. But we're here for the Wednesday night live show, the Panther-Lair Show, as we do every Wednesday night here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. An hour of Pitt sports talk. Us hanging out with you, Jim Hammett from Panther-Lair.com will join us in a minute, and we will take your comments and questions for the next hour talking about Pitt sports, football, basketball, recruiting, all those things right here on the live Panther-Lair Show. So if you got anything you want to say, and people are starting to trickle in, if you have anything you want to ask, anything you want to comment on, you want to talk about, put it over in the chat screen over on the right, and we'll read as many comments and questions as we can. We'll address as many as we can. Of course, if you want to make sure that we read your comment or answer your question, you can always be a super chatter. Click the little $sign down at the bottom. Throw a couple bucks to the podcast. We appreciate your support, and we'll definitely make sure we get to your comment or get to your question. Let's see. Anything we need to clean up? Any housekeeping stuff before we bring Jim in? News came out. Anthony Johnson, the defensive tackle, is transferring to Pitt. I'm sure Jim and I will talk about that for a little bit. Got to be a record, transferring to 3 different schools in one offseason. The dude gets around, and now he's going to finish his college career at Pitt. We think. Who knows? Maybe there's another transfer learning. I don't think so, but we'll see. Of course, check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, for all the Pitt sports coverage. We actually told you last night that this was a possibility of getting Anthony Johnson. Even though it looked like that ship had sailed a couple weeks ago. Turned out it didn't, and Pitt was still involved, and Pitt was able to get him off of his commitment to Mississippi State. And so we mentioned that on the message boards last night. If you were tuned in on Panther-Lair.com, you got you got that news a little bit early. You knew to look for it. You knew to keep an eye out for it, and then it came out tonight. Anthony Johnson made the announcement on Twitter just it looked like half hour ago or so. That he's going to transfer to Pitt. So we'll talk about that, of course. But if you want to stay up on all that kind of news and coverage, Panther-Lair.com is the place to go. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, and the message boards where we have lots of Pitt coverage and interaction and best online Pitt community you're going to find. Go check it out. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Before we bring Jim in, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You won't miss any of our Pitt video content. The daily morning Pitt videos, these weekly live streams every Wednesday night, and anything else that we might do, interviews or press conferences, post games, things like that. It's all right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. One of the fun things we always do, and I talked about this on the morning Pitt today, we do post game shows after the football games, and I think it was The Athletic had some predictions on the TV times and kickoff time, TV assignments and kickoff times for the first 3 weeks of the season throughout college football, and they had Pitt at Cincinnati predicted as a 7:30 game or 7 o'clock game or something like that on ESPN2, which seems like a lively little way to have that game and return to Nippert Stadium for a primetime game. I know we'll have a lot of fun on the post-game show. I don't know how that game would go, but we'll have fun on the post-game show. Jim Hammett often makes those road trips, so let's bring him in. Jim, I don't think you've never been to Nippert Stadium, have you?
I have not. What is it? The oldest stadium still in use or something along those lines?
I didn't know that. It's small. It's a little guy. And like as you approach it, it's weird. You walk up across you can't call it a concourse. I mean, you just walk in the gates, you walk across this big patio, and you're at the top of the stands. So it's like dug down in, which kind of obviously you go get it on an elevator and go up to the press box, but it's sort of a unique kind of approach to it. I don't know. It's always felt very small time. Like I think they probably had an ambulance on the sidelines type of feel to it, but kind of a cool little place. Cincinnati's kind of a nice city. I like Cincinnati. Have you been to Cincinnati?
I have not. I do plan. I think that is one of the road games I will go to.
Yeah. It's probably worth it for a trip. And so what would you think if you make that trip? How would you feel about a 7 o'clock kickoff or a 7:30 kickoff if that comes to pass?
I don't know. I feel like we've had a lot of night games the past couple of years. I've had some
Yeah.
long nights in a press box lately, but so I guess I'd just be used to it. But I think it would be a good crowd. I mean, I if it's not that big of a stadium, I mean, it's going to be sold out.
Yeah.
They don't do the trophy anymore, which is kind of a bummer. But
Yeah. Missed opportunity there. Would you rather, like, would you be more likely to drive out day of the game if it's a 7 o'clock kickoff, or drive home day of the game if it's a noon kickoff? That drives like 5.5 hours.
yeah, it's not bad. I mean, it's just kind of like straight across 70, like for most of it. I
Yeah.
don't know. I usually don't like traveling the day of game just in case like anything were to happen. I'm just not on a highway, like needing somewhere to go. But
Yeah.
then that turns into 2 nights of a hotel. So, you have to really kind of pick and choose on these road trips.
And you end up, I mean, like, it's a lot of time to kill waiting all day for like a night game. Like, it's one thing to wait in a different city for like a 3:30 game. You can, hang out in the morning, get some lunch, and then go over to the game. But like a 7 o'clock game, a 7:30 game, I mean, you're just sitting around even an interesting place like Atlanta, like, at a certain point, you're like, God, can we just start this game? Like, the whole day is getting away. What about driving back? Like, so like a noon game, you should be able to get out of the stadium by like 6. Would you drive back that night from a noon game?
I would. I think probably one of the craziest things I ever did was after the Dayton basketball game, like the play-in game. I didn't go to bed and I just got on the road at like 4 in. I wrote too many things. I was wired. I had too much coffee, and I was like, I'm just going to go. And I got home at a decent hour, and I think I went to Greensboro the next day. So I was thinking of myself. But yeah, that was a late night, early morning drive.
Right. I'm trying. I think I had 2. There was like, they played a game at Iowa in 2015, and then a game at Duke, I want to say. No, it wasn't that. It was the ACC championship game, the 2018, where I didn't even book a hotel for the second night. I just, like, because I had like a 6 a.m. flight, like a super early flight out. I think even for like the game in Charlotte, the ACC title game, I think I flew out of like Greensboro because it was cheaper. And I was just like, oh, screw it. That's like a 45-minute drive or something from Charlotte. It'll give me something to do at 3 in, And I think at the Iowa game, I think I just found like a Perkins and ate. I think Zeiss was there, and I think we went and we ate, and then we drove over to the airport and hung out in the Cedar Rapids Airport or wherever it was until the early morning. Like, just didn't even bother. Like, why book a hotel? You know what I mean? When you're just you're not gonna even go back for those night games. And then I guess, the other prediction they had in that column was the backyard brawl being at noon. But I think we've sort of assumed that, right? With the Pirate game at 6:40 that night, I think we've assumed that it's going to be a noon game for that one, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only way they got out of it 2 years ago was by moving the game to Thursday, and I don't think that's an option this year. Like, they moved the game up to like that opening game of the season, but I think that was also supposed to be like a week 3 Pirate conflict, and like that was the solution. But I don't think they have one this year. I think whenever the Pirates are playing, I think even like the big 2016, the first Penn State game at Heinz Field, noon. Like that's like the Pirates aren't moving like that. Everyone just needs to understand that now.
And I mean, like, it's college football, and actually not even just college, but like, yeah, prime time is like a bigger deal. It's more electric atmosphere and all that stuff. But I mean, like, some of these games, I mean, so like some of your classic memories of college football and even NFL are games being played in the afternoon. Like high school football, yeah, it's Friday night lights, it's under the lights. But I mean, like I've watched plenty of legendary NFL games that started at 1 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. You know what I mean? Like there's a beauty to watching a broad daylight game, a 12 o'clock game. And this isn't just because you and I obviously want every game to be noon so we can have something of a reasonable schedule on Saturdays. But like, I don't know. I don't get like too hung up like, oh, that's got to be a primetime game. Like a primetime game every now and then is okay. But like, it's good to have like day games. I think that's sort of part of the charm of college and pro football. Like, I like day games. I mean, night games are almost weird. And there's so many now in both sports. Obviously college when you get into the weeknight games and then the Saturday night games and everything, and NFL with the Thursday night and Sunday night and Monday night. Like, guys, I like daytime games. Like, it's fun to have football in the afternoon. Like it does. Like, I don't think people have been like, oh, that's such an insult to this. How could this be a noon game? Because it's a classic college football game being played at a classic college football time, right?
That's what I think. And I mean, I know Fox, they do their weekly game. It's like the big noon Saturday. Like that's their feature game. Like, we're going to take the noon window, and like they put some really good games there. I mean, Michigan, Ohio State, I don't think that's ever been a night game. It's always noon after the Saturday after Thanksgiving. I mean, some games just are meant to be at noon. So I don't know. I don't think it's a big deal. I mean, it's, Pitt, West Virginia. I mean, both uniforms are going to look great in the sunshine. It's going to be a packed stadium. I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I think it'll be a good game, and I like that I won't have to work till 3 a.m. And like we were just talking, how you and I sometimes do those things.
It happens sometimes. Yeah, and I think you made a good point with the 2016 Penn State game. Like, that was in broad daylight, and I wouldn't say it lost anything in terms of atmosphere. It was still the biggest sporting event in the city of Pittsburgh history. And the atmosphere was insane. And, it's not going to lose anything. Conversely, you fast forward 2 years, they played a primetime game against Penn State, and that atmosphere was terrible. Now, the game was crap and the weather was awful, and, that played into it as well. But yeah, I don't get too hung up on that. And like we say, I'll take all the noon games we can get. A couple super chatters jumping in here. Swim Boyd says, what sports would be on the chopping block if Pitt has to make some cuts? So we jump into the questions like right off the bat here, and we start with this question. And like, look, I think like, I don't like predicting what coaches might get fired. Like, oh, I'm pretty sure they're gonna can Tim Salem. I mean, I think, like, sometimes you get to a point where, like, yeah, okay, the offense is really bad. They're probably gonna have to make a change here, but I don't like to predict that guys will lose their jobs. I don't really feel comfortable predicting like what players will transfer. Like, I can look at the roster. You can look at the roster. We can all look at the roster and see who's not in line for playing time. If there's a redshirt junior who's no higher than third on the depth chart, they're probably not going to be here next year. But I don't need to sit here and run down the list of names. I think if we did run down the list of names like 6 months ago, most of those guys are probably gone, right? Like, I think a lot of that has come to fruition. We would have said Dorian Ford or Addison Copeland or Javonte Royal or whatever. So I don't like to do that. And I'm sort of uncomfortable about this one too. Like, I don't want to sit here and say Pitt's going to cut this sport or that sport, so I don't know. Do you want to name names? Do you want to put team sports programs on the chopping block, Jim?
Yeah, to build off what you're saying, because like once you and I start making predictions, then it goes to the board. So, well, Jim and Chris said like track and field's going to get canceled. Like, I don't know yet. I mean, I think there's some obvious sports, like there's some obvious guys on the football roster that are going to transfer, but I don't know. I mean, you can look around campus, you can see who has a stadium, who doesn't have a stadium. I mean, they're already really close to the line of like having the minimum amount of sports to be Division I.
Right.
So it's not like there's a lot that they can chop. They could, if they're going to chop anything, it's only going to be one or two. And so they might not do anything. I mean, I think they probably have the right size athletic department for what they are.
Yeah. And I mean, like you just as an example, you mentioned like track and field, and I heard someone else suggest that, and then I was thinking, I was like, oh yeah, they have like 1 billion student athletes on those teams, like, but not all of those student athletes are on scholarship. Like, you're not. I think somebody on the message board was like, I actually think the university might make money off the track and field program because, if you look at the sheer volume of student athletes, they're not all on full scholarship. They probably have equivalencies and things like that. So Pitt, the university, might be actually like profiting from having track and field. I don't know if it exactly works out that way, but like the one that I keep coming back to, and I'm not saying that Pitt is going to cut it or would cut it, but it just, and we talked about it last week. The one that is really interesting to me and curious to me is baseball. Simply for a few reasons. One, I think it's tough for Pitt to compete in baseball already, and I think they've shown that. Even though we talked last week about maybe they should be able to do better than they have, I mean, they just haven't. So it's just a reality of it, and there's a challenge of being a northern school playing baseball in the ACC and trying to compete at that level. Also, if they go to full scholarships on like a 35-player roster, I just don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze on that for Pitt. I don't know if they could succeed at a high enough level to make it worth that kind of investment. And so I'm not sitting here and saying I think baseball would get cut, but if they don't fully fund it, and I'm not sure if they would be able to, or if they would even have the stomach to do it, then you start asking a question of like, well, what are we doing here? You got this beautiful stadium that, I mean, I think it was built at least 10 years ago, right?
I think they've been there about 10.
Yeah. But it's still a beautiful facility. I assume it's nice inside for the players and everything, but you do have to ask the question of like, what are we doing here? You know, if you're not going to be able to put all the scholarships to use that you're allowed to use, are you really competing? And if you're not really competing, I don't want to say what's the point, but what's the point, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw something like a few people are tweeting out like however each team spends, and I think Pitt's spending for baseball is towards the bottom of the Power Five. And I mean, there are some Power Five schools that flat out don't have baseball already. Like Syracuse does not have a baseball team. I don't think Wisconsin has a baseball team. So I think there are some other schools in the North that have looked at this exact same question and come up with that answer before. So it wouldn't be unprecedented. I mean, Pitt baseball's been around for a long time. I think it goes back to the 1950s, maybe longer. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if they'll get rid of it, but like, I do wonder if you're in this new world, is that the right sport to invest in? Are you going to have 35 guys on scholarship? And I don't know if Pitt's going to be ever going to be much more than what they are.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, like it already feels like they're fighting a losing battle, you know, that they're not really able to compete. I know, I think last week I said they've only had one winning season under Mike Bell, but you're right. I think they had two. They had one season that was like 23-20 or something. Would it make, I don't even know the right way to phrase this question, but would it be better for Pitt to drop a couple sports and invest in a Division I hockey program? Could a hockey program succeed and draw interest and get like catch on with Pitt fans? I mean, we saw the whole city rally when Robert Morris was didn't they like cut hockey for like a minute? And everybody came out of the woodworks of how much they support Robert Morris hockey. And I can only assume that they sell out every game because of how much the local media were complaining about that whole situation. But given the city we're in, maybe there will be more of a draw there. Now, maybe there's more investment. I mean, you obviously have to have a rink. You need somewhere to play. Maybe, I don't know if they're going to convert the baseball stadium into a hockey rink, but would that be a sport, as we talk so much about cutting sports, do you think it'd be worth it for Pitt to look into actually investing in maybe adding a program, maybe cutting a couple and adding a either men's and women's hockey programs?
I don't know. I don't know what the study would be for that because you were led to believe that Robert Morris was this very popular. They must be Pittsburgh's college hockey team, but the most I ever heard about them was after they got their program cut. So I don't know how big of a deal it actually was. But I look at like someone like Penn State, like they had to just build a program from scratch, and they had a billionaire that was able to fund it. So I mean, I think it's easier said than done because I think Terry Pacula built the arena, funded the program, did everything, and Pitt has other areas where they need their big donors to spend more. So, I mean, I think it would be cool. I think the Pitt script would look great on a hockey sweater. I mean, I don't know. I think the club team actually sells them, and a few people
does look great on a hockey sweater. It looks amazing.
So yeah, for that alone, I say start up hockey. But yeah, I mean, I guess you're going to have face these kind of hard questions, maybe more so on the cutting end. But like, I guess that's a different approach to maybe adding something and bringing some value to the whole athletics brand. And I think hockey might be able to do it. I mean, Pittsburgh's it's a hockey town when the Penguins are really good. And like I think like it was before they drafted Sidney Crosby, it wasn't a hockey town. After they drafted Sidney Crosby, it became a hockey town. So is it going to be that in the future? I don't know.
Yeah. And I wonder too, I mean, you make a good point about Robert Morris. I wonder if Pitt, by virtue of being a bigger school, would draw more interest, maybe locally or regionally. Although I think they'd be they'd be competing at the same level as Robert Morris, right? So it's not like, they would be playing this higher level. And I don't know. I don't. It just feels like sometimes it feels like baseball's a losing proposition. It's just tough. But Matthew Lease is a super chatter. I don't know which comment he wanted me to highlight. He has two here, but we'll give you the first one. Jim is a Portlandian. Much respect on your shirt. So shout out
for Bill Walton. This is in respect. Yeah.
I thought you would wear a tie-dye for that,
It's a Grateful Dead.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so we couldn't
really
see that
is
part. Okay.
Yeah, it really is a Bill Walton shirt. Yeah,
that's good. That's really good. Yeah. Shout out to Bill Walton. Rest in peace on that guy. But Matthew also says, how do you think the running back carries will be divided this year? I was kind of surprised to see David Hale's comment on Pat Narduzzi loving Desmond Reed. Yeah, Narduzzi talked up Reed throughout spring camp. Well, I shouldn't say throughout, but a bunch of times in spring camp, talking about how tough he is and he's a home run hitter and that kind of thing. I think we've talked about it at different points. I mean, I still think Rodney Hammond's number one, right? Rodney Hammond's RB1. And then I think there's a distribution behind him, and some of it may be situational. I don't think Desmond Reed, and I could be wrong, and I apologize if I'm off base on this. I don't know if he strikes me as a 25 carry per game guy, but he doesn't. I don't think he needs to be a 25 carry per game guy in order to be effective and help this offense. I think he's got that home run hitting ability. If he's got a little bit of that toughness that Narduzzi talks about, that's great. But if he can just, if he broke one big run per game, I mean, that's a game-changing kind of ability, that you use him strategically. You hand it off to him a couple times on certain types of runs. You throw to him a couple times on certain types of plays, but you don't make him your workhorse back. I think if anyone's a workhorse back, it's Rodney Hammond. And then it's Reed, it's Derek Davis, I don't think it's going to be Daniel Carter. But it's maybe Juelz Goff, it's some mix of guys there. But I don't know. Do you see more even distribution, or do you see one guy being the guy, which wasn't really the case last year? I mean, you look at Rodney Hammond's carries; it's sort of criminal, and it's the kind of workload that would get a coach fired, I would say.
Yeah, I mean. Desmond Reed is getting some offseason love right now. I mean, I think we talked a little bit last week how he's one of the highest graded returning running backs. I think someone tweeted that out. And obviously David Hale talked to Narduzzi, and Narduzzi talked him up, and we heard about it in the spring. So, I mean, I think there's a role for him, and I still want to see how this offense functions. I want to see, we talk about Rodney Hammond being probably more of the workhorse back. Do they need a workhorse back? Is that going to be part of the offense? Or are they going to be throwing the ball so much that it makes sense to have Desmond Reed on the field more? So, I mean, I kind of want to get a more sense of, how this whole thing operates, more than what we saw, a little bit in the spring. So maybe there is this, a world where he's playing a lot more or playing equal with him, and just because of the tempo and because of how they play and, how they try to operate.
Well, the tempo is interesting too. I wonder what that does to substitutions and substitution patterns. You know what I mean? I like, it's not that you can't substitute when you're going tempo, but you're probably not going to sub much. You're going to get up and go. Now, when the clock stops, you have an incomplete pass or out of bounds or something like that, then you have a chance to sub your running backs and your receivers, move guys in and out. But if you're picking up first downs and moving the ball and run and the clock's rolling and you're going tempo, I think you could see more guys like running back at least getting like a full series as opposed to, a couple of plays and they come out and they switch every 4 plays or something like that. I think you're going to have to do the whole drive, right? I mean, there shouldn't be much opportunity for substitution, should there?
There shouldn't be. And I'm trying to think what they've done in the past couple of years. I mean, is it someone gets the first quarter, second quarter, for third, it never really made sense.
There's no pattern to it.
There was never really
sometimes it was 2 drives in one and then 2 and then 1, or sometimes it was in the middle of drives. I mean, guys are tapping out. It felt totally haphazard and made no sense to me. So, but again, that was with that kind of offense. But when they did go up tempo, it's not like you were really you just it slows you down. It slows you down to substitute. So it might be drive by drive. It might be, Hammond gets the first drive, and if it's extended drive, then Derek Davis gets the next drive, or Desmond Reed gets the next drive. I think if the offense is working, there's not a lot of opportunity to substitute the running back. So I don't know. I don't know what might happen there. Let's get into some more comments here and questions. Byron Flex says 3 related questions. 1, what is Pitt's share of the $2.8 billion in back damages? 2, how much of the $20 million annual salary cap can Pitt fund? 3, who pays for 1 and 2? All right. So 3 related questions. What is Pitt's share of the $2.8 billion in house damages? So the way that's going to work out, it seems like I think the NCAA is ultimately the NCAA is going to distribute that money to the student athletes, the former student athletes. And I think it's like 60% is going to come directly from the NCAA. The other 40% is going to come from money that the NCAA would have distributed to the schools, but is holding back. And I think it's only like 1 or 2 million per year per school over like 10 years. But so, to question 3, who pays for that? It's like Pitt's just not getting the money that they would have otherwise gotten. Now, ultimately, you have to make that up in your budget, but Pitt's not necessarily on the hook for it, right? Is that your understanding of it as well? Am I representing that accurately?
No, that's how I have it. It's like the total revenue share. So like all the money like the schools get from the NCAA tournament and all the revenue from that, it's always distributed. You're just not going to get that now, or you're going to get less of it. And
you're going to get like a couple million less than you would have otherwise. Okay, so that's that. Number 2, how much of the $20 million annual salary cap can Pitt fund? Well, that's a $20 million question, right? Like that's the question that everybody's trying to answer. Now there's a bunch of different things, like schools are going to get a little bit more money from a new like March Madness TV contract. I think that starts next year. Like there was an extension and it's going to make $4 or $5 million more. And, they could, I think there was an increase in the ACC revenue. Like it's interesting, at least for this first year, or like for like 2025-26 school year, Pitt might only need to come up with like 10 million or so. Like they might get 5 to 10 million in extra revenue they weren't already sort of counting on that'll help offset some of that money that they have to put out. Where does that money come from? Like the money that they're going to have to share with the student athletes, like how are they going to make that money up? I mean, it's not student fees or taxpayers. It's coming out of the athletic department revenue, right? Like that's it. It's revenue sharing. Like this $20 million salary cap we're talking about is revenue sharing. So it's, you have your revenue. I think they're taking, I forget the exact math. It's like some percentage of the total of the average revenue of the top 50 programs or 30 programs, or forget what exactly the number of programs. And then that's where the cap is set. And so it'll change every year. It's like 20 to 22 million is what they're projected to be. So that's your number, and that's going to come out of your athletic department revenue. And that's, this big question when you talk about how much of it can they fund? They're going to fund as much of it as they possibly can. They're going to do everything they can to get up to the cap, because if you don't get up to the cap, you're going to put yourself behind, because other schools will get up to the cap. And you don't want to be that guy who's like, oh, well, we're not actually giving all the money back or giving all the money out to the kids. So, that's where the creative accounting comes in. They got to find a way to make it work within the budget. And that's why we get into questions of cutting sports. If they have to do this year after year after year, if they're losing 20 million out of their revenue every year, something's got to give. I mean, somewhere they're going to have to find some ways to make up those dollars. So, who pays for it? The athletic department pays for it. Like it comes out of that revenue. Was that your understanding as well? I mean, anything?
No, because they're still not admitting that they are employees. They are just sharing revenue with their athletes. They are not making them titled employees. They can't collective bargain. They're like none of that. Like, so like they're just sharing the revenue. So that's my understanding of it as well.
Okay. So hopefully that answers Byron's questions. I think clears a few things up there, hopefully. Anthony Tennyson says, I love the extra defensive line, and we just got more depth. I love it. So yeah, Anthony Johnson, formerly of Jeanette, formerly of Bowling Green, formerly of Youngstown State, formerly of Illinois, formerly of Mississippi State. Although it's not really fair to include Mississippi State. I mean, he wasn't really there. Like Illinois, he at least went and took classes and practice. So defensive lineman, a defensive tackle from Jeanette, went to Bowling Green out of high school, transferred to Youngstown State, played there a few years, had a breakout year last fall, transferred to Illinois in December, went through spring camp with the Illini, and transferred again. Went into the transfer portal. He was down to Pitt and Mississippi State, ended up deciding on Mississippi State a couple weeks ago, and then announced today that he is ultimately transferring to Pitt. This has to be a record. Jim, you pointed this out, transferring to 3 different schools in one offseason. without ever playing a game for any of them. Illinois, Mississippi State, Pitt. I can only assume they never actually signed anything at Mississippi State or enrolled at Mississippi State or anything like that, because he went back in the transfer market. Now he's coming to Pitt. And I think, to Anthony Tennyson's point, if nothing else, he adds depth. He didn't have a ton of production, but he's playing the defensive tackle position, where I tend to feel like production is a luxury at the defensive tackle position, like tackles for loss and sacks. I mean, yeah, if you have Cansey or Twyman or Donald, then yeah, you're going to get those kind of things. But for the most part, Pitt just needs those guys to stuff the run, right? And if they can get some backfield production, great. That's a real bonus. But it's a luxury. Anthony Johnson brings experience, some career production, more career production than any other defensive tackle on this team, and a veteran guy, and adds another body to a group that needed to boost the numbers. What do you make of Anthony Johnson's transfer here?
Pretty much everything you're saying. I mean, like, you look at that defensive tackle position, there's not a lot of returning anything. I mean, you're talking about new faces everywhere. I mean, they're already relying on one transfer, Nick James, Nakai Johnson making a position switch. Then you have a bunch of guys that have never played. I mean, like Elliot Donald, Sean Fitzsimmons, like you're talking about a couple snaps here and there. Isaiah Neal redshirted, and a bunch of freshmen. So like, it doesn't like answer a ton of questions. Like, you're still worried about that defensive line position, but at least you have someone with experience. I think he's going to be the only, I guess, senior eligible player on the roster. I mean, I guess, Nakai and Elliott have been around for a while, but I guess he's technically the only senior. But that's kind of what the transfer portal is. I mean, you're going to end up with a guy from Youngstown State that you're hoping can make the jump. I mean, obviously other Power 5 programs saw the same things in him. Illinois wanted him, Mississippi State, and he had a bunch of offers, whether it was back in December or, a couple weeks ago, whenever he re-entered the portal. So, I mean, he was a hot commodity. I mean, he's a local guy. He's from Jeanette. He's probably, Pitt has a bunch of WPIAL guys on the team already, so he's probably going to be able to just kind of fit right in, culturally, I think. I mean, he's going to understand what Pitt football is and should be able to hit the ground running. We've seen guys like that before. I mean, Johnny Patrician, another guy that was not quite as well traveled, but also had an interesting journey before he got to Pitt. So I don't know. I mean, I think he'll fit in, and they need all the help they can get on the defensive line.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's much downside to this. If you have scholarship space, you should use it on a guy who can help you at a position where you need bodies, and they need one. So he's probably a guy who I would imagine always wanted to go to Pitt. I think I remember talking to him when he was coming out of high school, and he did. He wanted to go to Pitt, just didn't work out as an opportunity for him. And so, I mean, if nothing else, if it doesn't work out, and he doesn't play, he doesn't play. But, I think, like you said, I mean, it adds some depth. Chris Kramer says, "Hi, Chris. I've been a little checked out with Little League Baseball over the last few months. Will Pitt football be competitive this season? Hoping for some good news." Chris, that's a big question there, my friend. Will Pitt football be competitive? Look, if we make it relative, will they be more competitive than last year? Jim, I would say yes. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Chris, we can give you that. We think Pitt football will be more competitive than they were last year, largely due to the fact that, I speak for myself, although I assume Jim would agree, largely due to the fact that it won't be a complete disaster at quarterback. We think. Tomorrow's we have quarterback week this week. We're doing our quarterback preview content, and tomorrow's the bold prediction day, Jim. And I'm going to boldly predict that not only will the quarterback position not be a complete disaster, but that it'll achieve at a particularly high level, actually. So I'm getting really what's the best way to say unrealistically optimistic about Nate Arnell. No, not unrealistically. So I'm looking at like some of these numbers, right? And I think we talked last week about the small sample size stats, all the quarterbacks in the ACC who had 70 dropbacks and how he ranked among the top 5 in like every stat category among those guys, or at least averages, not total values. But you look at his last 2 games, the Boston College and Duke games, you take what he did in those games, projected over 13 games, he goes for like 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions, completing like 67% of his passes. He would have been one of like 5 quarterbacks in the ACC last year to throw 20 touchdowns at all. And he would have had the second fewest interceptions behind only Jordan Travis. And that's based on how he played against Boston College and Duke. And I said this the other day, like, okay, you might say, oh, well, that's just Boston College and Duke. I mean, who do they play this year? They do play Boston College again, and they don't play Duke again, but they play a bunch of Duke type. I mean, they don't have a killer schedule. This schedule is pretty loaded with Boston Colleges and Dukes, I would say. I think, I think we talked about the schedule last week. Like, obviously, Clemson is Clemson. Carolina is always going to be Carolina, and SMU is a concern. But like, who else is so far demonstrably better than Boston College and Duke were last year? Like, maybe their teams are a little bit better, but is there anybody that are like, oh, I wouldn't even put them in the same category? There's no Florida State. There's no. Who would you even mention? I mean, NC State.
The Louisville team that Pitt already
Louisville,
beat.
Okay, Louisville. All right, so if those are all right, if we say Clemson, and I'm just keeping Clemson in there as sort of like a legacy mention as like the big team, but like Clemson, who else I made? Carolina, SMU, and Louisville.
Yeah.
And the other 8 are all Boston Colleges and Dukes, more or less. I mean, and who knows? Carolina might be at that level this year. I don't think there's any guarantee. They don't have Drake May back. There's no guarantee about what they're going to be able to do and what their team is going to look like. So my point is that there's a bunch of teams that sort of remind me of the 2 teams that Nate Yarnell played pretty well against. And so I'm getting, his 66.7% completion rate. That would have been like tops in the ACC last year if he did that over the course of a season. I think he's a smart player. I think he's efficient. I think he's got a good enough arm and good enough escapability that he can move around a little bit. And I think he'll take care of the football. And if he throws for 3,000 yards and 20 touchdowns, they'll probably win like 8 or 9 games in the regular season. Right? So is he capable? Is he capable of throwing 3,000 yards and 20 touchdowns in 13 games?
I think he's capable of doing that. I don't think you're asking him to do anything crazy, especially for an offense that's supposed to throw the ball a lot. I mean, he's supposed to throw for 300 yards a game. I think that's what Cade Bell has this whole thing designed to do. And I think he even has the weapons to do it. I mean, I think you and I are both pretty big believers in Konate Mumfield. I think like he's a pretty good receiver and probably is better than his numbers suggest. I think Kenny Johnson has some ability, and Gavin Bartholomew's still a person, and we always hear how great he is. So, I mean, I think he has weapons. I think Pitt has. I said this last week, but like when I watched them play Louisville, it didn't feel like the biggest upset in the world because they all recruit the same players. Like it was a lot of guys that Pitt recruited on the Louisville roster and vice versa. And really what it came down to, Louisville just had a better quarterback last year and they were able to take it further. But like man for man, pound for pound, talent-wise, like there wasn't that big disparity. It wasn't like Pitt upset Clemson back in 2016 or whatever it was. Like there wasn't this giant gap. It was just like Pitt had a really bad year at quarterback and they only won 3 games. But I think they're poised to at least bounce back to 500, probably a little bit better, but we'll see.
And they were competitive with Florida State, right? I mean,
for 3 quarters,
decent amount of that game, right? It didn't look like, oh, wow, this is a national championship contender against a 3-win team. I mean, like it was far more competitive than that. And I mean, that's, there's something to be said for that. Josh Newark thinks there's something to be said for your take on the Dino Cat. He fully supports it and the need for Pitt to have it as a throwback, but your take on the gold on gold Dino Cat might put you in the ultra sicko status. The best thing about the gold on gold Dino Cat was that the gold didn't match. Yeah, the jerseys and the pants were different color.
That's someone replied to my tweet and said like 50 shades of gold. Which
I mean, what a bumbling mess. I mean, like how do you do that? Like how do you not like drop your apparel company instantly when they screw up like that? I mean,
that was like senior day too. I think it was like last game of the year and they bust out these like all golds or something and like they don't match at all. They were terrible, but
man, unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, that's the retro, so they need to bring it back. If you go to Cincinnati, Voodoo IPA has some very specific advice for you. Do not go for a morning walk on the bridge across the Ohio River and take pictures of the bridge. He did and was questioned by authorities as they thought he was a terrorist. Worst part of his Cincinnati trip. So very specific anecdote there. Very specific advice to avoid taking pictures of the bridge from the bridge, apparently. So don't do that, Jim. Okay?
I will not.
Cool. Let's see. Nitro 230 says, do you think that there's a chance Pitt cuts baseball to make way for a new football stadium? Pitt really needs to solve the attendance issues, and I just don't think that happens at Heinz Field. What would the capacity be if they build a football stadium on the footprint of the current baseball stadium? 20,000?
Probably less.
Yeah. Because, I mean, a football field's big. Football field takes up a lot of space.
Mm-hmm.
So do my math here. Probably to the outfield wall is 300 feet. Do you know the dimensions of Pitt's baseball field?
I don't offhand, but...
Is that called Cost? What's that field called?
Yeah, the Charles Cost Field.
Charles Cost Field. Let me see if I can find the dimensions of this.
I noticed the baseball team this year, they were referring to it as the Chuck. I think they just kind of started it. But I kind of like that.
Yeah, it's all right. So it covers... Okay, so the whole Peterson Sports Complex covers 12 acres. I feel like that would not be enough. But let me see if I can... I want to try and find 300 foot. All right.
Down the line.
300 baseline, 375 power alleys, and center field is 405 feet. So down the line, you have the size of a football field, like the 100 yards, right? Home plate to the outfield. But then you have to fit the whole rectangle in there. I guess you could do it, but then you have to get stands. And so, like you said, like maybe less than 20,000 people. I don't think that solves the attendance issues. I don't think there's enough space there for the baseball to tear down the baseball stadium and put a football stadium. I seems to me that's a non-starter. Do you see that idea getting off the ground, Jim?
I do. I don't. I mean, like I do not see that as a viable option.
Thought I was about to get some hot takes in there. Okay, so there's that. Matthew Lease wants to know any feedback on how the new hires are doing on the recruiting trail. Got anything? What are you picking up on talking to recruits and stuff?
What I can gather is they're all pretty hard workers because we saw them out in May and April during the evaluation periods, and they're offering a ton of people. And I mean, the feedback seems really good from the offensive staff, and those are the new guys, and it's kind of what you would expect. When I asked, like, what do you think of Cade Bell? How was that conversation? Well, he's energetic. He's upbeat. I really like that. He really has a plan. And, like, that's exactly how he presents himself to the media, too, and to his team. So it doesn't surprise me that recruits kind of take to that. So, I mean, I think he's doing well. I think J.J. Laster's doing well. I really think, when I talk to offensive linemen, it seems like Jeremy Darveau really is a pretty personable guy as well. So, I don't know. I mean, we're coming up. What's today? It's May 29th. So we're almost at June. We're going to find out very soon, how well they did on the recruiting trail. But I think so far, so good. I mean, I think they're making impressions, but at a certain point, you have to land some people, and they're going to land some people next month.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It's going to be June is always June. Just a quick, the Cost Field has 900 seats, 900. That's the capacity. Yeah. So even if, I don't think you could add enough to even get it to like 3,000. You know what I mean? Like I don't even think there's room to add that many seats. Like, I don't know what they end up adding when they have these games at like baseball stadiums, like the Red Sox, or I guess they don't even add seats on those, right? I mean, they just play them in the stands. So I guess you wouldn't have attendance issues if you're only trying to sell 900 tickets for a game, right? So that, yeah. I know we already put that idea to bed, but I just happened to be looking at that while you were talking about the recruiting trail. But it's so tough looking ahead to June with official visits when there's, how many guys do we have right now on the list of official visitors? 30, 35?
It's close to 40, and like
close
some have changed. Like I had guys,
right.
I had guys on the list. I've already taken them off, but I've added new guys. So like it's kind of hovered around like 38 right now.
So that's the challenge of like, wow, here's what I'm really watching for in June is you don't know which guys are actually going to make it. Sometimes we don't even know until like the morning of, or we'll have to like text some sources like the night of the first day of the official visit, like, hey, who all made it? Did everybody make it in? Mm-hmm. And it'll be, oh, there's a thumbs up. There we go. I didn't even do it. I was just texting and it did it.
Yeah.
Is it going to do it again?
Yep.
Yeah, look at that. Look at that. I wonder if I. Wow.
Oh,
How about
wow.
that? That actually. Anyway, I won't pantomime texting anymore, since that obviously set off the trigger. So we don't always know who's coming in, so it's hard. I mean, I don't know. Is there anything that stands out to you just quite yet, or are we still? I mean, we're still probably trying to. The first official visit weekend is not until next week, Thursday through Saturday. So we're still confirming names for that. But is there anything that stands out to you yet about the with the official visits coming up here in this next month?
I'm interested to see what happens at running back and wide receiver because they already have one of each. Or no, they have two receivers and a running back. Or no, two receivers. They just have a lot of them coming in to visit. They have like a lot, and they're all 5'11", and they're all 180 pounds, and they're all 4'4", 40s, and they all look the same. And you already have Tony Kinsler and Bryce Yates, and so I don't know how that's all going to work out because it seems like they're really hosting a lot of running backs and a lot of wide receivers, but this whole offense is built on speed, so we're kind of seeing what they're targeting. But yeah, I'm interested to see how that all works.
Yeah. Yeah. People are not very nice about small receivers. You know, I don't understand why they're so mean about it, but they say a lot of like mean words on there. Willett Harris jumping in says, do you think athletic directors as currently constituted will soon be replaced by distinguished alumni whose chief responsibility is fundraising? I see sports information department expanding operations. You know, I mean, I do think the overall makeup of athletic departments is going to change. I think the structure, the organization of athletic departments is going to change. I think the types of people who are put into leadership roles in athletic departments is going to change. I don't think you're going to have as many like former coaches. You know what I mean? I don't think you're going to have as many like Barry Alvarez types as athletic directors because I think it's a different kind of business now. It's a different kind of industry than what it's ever been. And so I do think that'll change. I don't know about distinguished alumni. Look, you say, you know, whose chief responsibility is fundraising. The chief responsibility of athletic directors since forever has always been fundraising. Like the number one thing to do is to raise money. Well, the number one thing to do is to spend money, but to do that, you have to raise the money. And so that's always been a top priority. So I don't know if that really changes, but I do think you'll see different. I think you'll see people from different walks of life and different career fields stepping into these roles because the demands of the job are changing. Even already it's changed in the last 10 years, and it's going to change even more in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years. It's going to change even more drastically. And so I just think you'll see different types of people, not necessarily distinguished alumni, unless they have a background that sort of supports where this whole thing is going.
Yeah, I mean, are we going to see more people with like, you know, in business, like because you're kind of running a company now. It's kind of more so that end of it because you're sharing revenue with people, and so you have to kind of manage that differently. So I don't know. I mean, athletic directors, like that's all Heather like already. That's all she does already. Like that's what most ADs do. I mean, she is having dinner with people and trying to get more money from them to, you know, help Pitt sports. So I don't know too many ADs that aren't doing that already. So, I mean, I don't know if there's going to be like college sports changes and everyone switches ADs because a lot of these guys are kind of, you know, they're kind of already doing this.
Right. I agree. Tommy Grams says, I guess when we were talking about Nate Yarnell and how he played last year, maybe what you were talking about last year, Tommy Graham says it's a new season. That doesn't mean squat. But, I mean, if you're going to try and project how a team is going to be, what else do you have to go by other than what they did a year ago and the players they're returning and the players they lost? I mean, that's the basis for all of the expectations. So it does mean squat. Will Z says, what is going to be your hype train for this year? Last year was Kamara and Means. I'm thinking Kenny Johnson and Jordan Bass. Jim, I'll let you go first. What's your what hype trains are you driving on offense and defense this year?
I think you guys should all be buying tickets to the Braylon Lovelace hype train. I think he's going to be one of Pitt's best defensive players this year. I think he showed a little flashes last year, but he got really big in the spring league. You can tell he's like been in college for a while and he looks the part. So I really think he's going to have a big year. Offensively, I could get behind Kenny Johnson. I mean, I think if there's any candidate on that offense, it's probably him. Just because like you kind of already know what Mumfield and Reynolds and Bartholomew and Hammond, like you already have a lot of those guys in place. So I could get behind Kenny Johnson.
Yeah. Who am I really hyping up? I'm trying to the young linebackers is probably an obvious option. Maybe I like Lovelace. I'll probably go like Kyle Lewis. Maybe the Kyle Lewis hype train, or maybe I don't like any of these guys. Well, no, I like a lot of these guys. I think there are good players out there. I mean, I've talked up Sean Fitzsimmons. I don't know. I probably like Kyle Lewis would be the hype train on defense. Offensively, I don't really have one. I have to think about it more.
I'm bullish on Nakai Johnson, defensive tackle Nakai Johnson. I think he's going to be productive this year.
They've talked him up a lot, which I can't decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I really liked his film out of high school. So like I'm not willing to give up on him yet because like I was like really high on him as a recruit out of West Mifflin.
Yeah, I mean I was too, and I know they were, and it seemed
a lot
like
of people
a good option. Yeah, I mean, so we had him as a 4-star prospect. I don't know. I just haven't. I have to think about it. I have to get into training camp and to where like my brain is starting to melt from standing outside in the sun all the time. So I start like hyping up things. I mean, last year at this point, it was obvious. It was Bengali Kamara and Bub Means. I mean, like I knew that. And like that train left the station a long time ago. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see this summer. Willad Harris says, on what planet is anyone going to be able to afford a weekend at the Greenbrier to watch Pitt basketball play in that early season tournament? So I'm trying to find out, like, I've seen a lot of people talk about how expensive this is. Have you seen, like, what it's going to be? Oh,
I think it's like a ballroom type situation, like the Atlantis thing.
Yeah,
so it's not like a real gym.
But I'm talking about tickets, like price wise.
So
I see it now, like $1,800 for hotel, ticket, and parking.
So yeah, you see the guys that sit courtside at the Pete.
Yeah,
those are the guys. To answer the question, those guys.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, and you can upgrade to a deluxe room, a Draper suite, a Paradise Row cottage, or a Spring Row deluxe cottage for an extra $485 per night. So you would pay like $3,000 to go to. It's in West Virginia, right? You go to West Virginia for a basketball tournament.
See, I've thought about it because, like, I think Pitt Louisville is Saturday, then the second round of this tournament is Sunday. So, like, if I drive from Louisville through West Virginia, maybe I could cover the game. Probably not stay at the Greenbrier. It'd probably be more like a Best Western in like Beckley, West Virginia. But then,
wait, is the Greenbrier that far down? Is it?
I think it's pretty south. Yeah.
Really? Greenbrier Luxury Resort. Where are you? I'm really curious about this now.
Yeah, I don't know if I can make it work, but if I could do the Greenbrier in Louisville in one weekend, that would be impressive. I just don't know logistically if it makes sense.
That might be actually it's not far from Beckley. Actually, you're right, and it's looks like it might actually be south, like as the crow flies from south of Louisville. So you actually might be able to make that work. I don't know if I would recommend it, but you might actually be able to make that work.
We'll see if I'm crazy enough come November.
See if like you can get like some special deal for media hotel to like lodging. Yeah, instead of being whatever it is, $400 a night, it's only like $385 per night. So Tommy Graham says we have a whole new offensive system and other teams in the conference made changes as well. Don't be surprised if the team finishes with 5 wins. So wait, other teams made changes too, right? So we can't really hold that against Pitt, right? If we're going to say we don't know anything about Pitt because they made changes, I mean, other teams made changes as well. I'm just looking at the quality of the players. Like, it ultimately is going to come down to the caliber of players. I mean, Cade Bell's offense needs to work, and, obviously he needs to not be terrible, but probably the success of the offense will come down to the quality of the players. And a lot of that will come down to the play at quarterback. And so when I talk about Nate Yarnell, I look at how he did late last season and, just kind of what I expect out of him. I think he'll be better than Djokovic. I think he'll be good enough to get into, winning record territory and somewhere 6, 7, 8 wins. I don't think that's crazy because, as we've talked about a lot of times, they were 3-9 with some of the worst quarterback play in the country. Some of the worst quarterback play we've ever seen from Pitt. If you get just a little bit better than that, a little bit better quarterback play, the overall performance should come up. And so, yeah, they're breaking in a new offensive system, which is, brings its own concerns. But I don't know. I just sort of, and this is famous last words, I feel like it can't possibly be worse than last year's offense, right?
I'm with you. I mean, there are some of the, even that Virginia Tech game last year. There was a time Phil Dracovic had 5 completions and they were still in the game. I think Braylon Lovelace had that scoop and score. It was all of a sudden it was 28-21 in the second half and Pitt had 5 offensive completions. We are not talking about they need Dan Marino or Kenny Pickett to walk through that door. Tom Savage would be good enough, man. We're just be okay, and the team's going to win a couple more games.
I mean, Tom Savage was good. I don't know what you're talking about. He would have had a 3,000-yard season if he wasn't peeing blood at halftime of the Pizza Bowl and couldn't play in the second half. He was 100 yards away from a 3,000-yard season. He was good. I think you could have picked a better example, like Tino.
Yeah.
You could have Chad Wojtek.
Bill Stahl, any of these people.
Well, Bill Stahl won 10 games. I mean, he had a 10-win season. So, and he had a decent amount to do with that 10 wins. So I don't even think that's a good example. But Chad Wojtek could have won 7, 8 games last year, right? Well, yeah, because because I'm sitting here and we've been saying all along that Nate Yarnell would have won 7, 8 games last year. Shoot, Vare probably would have gotten them to at least 6 if he started from the beginning of the season. So, yeah, any of these guys. I mean, you would have to be okay, Pat Bostic 2007 probably still wins at least 5 games with this team last year. I mean, it was the quarterback play was just they wasted the first 5 games or 4 out of the first 5 games with that quarterback experience. But I mean, we've talked about this a million times. We talked about it all last fall. We talked about it all off season. It's the main thing we've talked about, and we'll keep talking about it until they actually play games and prove us wrong or prove us right, and we'll see what happens then. But anyway, I think we're right up around 9 o'clock, so it seems like a good time to check out. Everybody, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com to get all the Pitt video content. Of course, stay tuned to the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com for all your Pitt sports coverage, football, basketball, and recruiting. We cover it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with other Pitt fans. Thanks to everybody who hung out tonight. We appreciate all the comments and questions. It's a lot of fun. Jim, thanks you for your time and your contributions on Panther-Lair.com. Everybody have a good rest of your Wednesday night. We'll have morning Pitt tomorrow, another one on Friday. Oh, wait, hold on. Bill Florian jumped in late. It says he's taking the over on the 5.5 wins. No doubt.
Book it. Straight to the casino. Put it on.
Confetti.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill.
5.5, no doubt. All right, Bill's taking the over on the 5.5. Bill, we appreciate your contributions and your super chat. Have a good night, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow on the Morning Pit, and we'll see you next Wednesday night for another live stream right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.